All right, in this video, we're going to learn how to factor polynomials by grouping. So for my students, this is Module 9. This is the second part of Lesson 5. And so to factor by grouping, that is just a method of factoring when a polynomial has 4 terms. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do if we're looking at this polynomial that has 4 terms, we're going to split this equation into 2. So I have my first set of 2 terms and my second set of 2 terms. Now there might be times where these terms are not necessarily in the correct order. So you can always rearrange your polynomial so that you have a greatest common factor. So factoring by grouping, the step 1 is going to factor out the greatest common factor, GCF, from the first 2 terms. So if we have 12x squared and a positive 2x, we're going to find the GCF of 12x squared and 2x. So 12 is 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And 2x we can factor into 1 and 2. So our greatest common factor here for our coefficient is 2. And if we're looking at our variables, we have x squared and x. And remember, if we're looking for our greatest common factor, we're looking for the smallest exponent. So here that would be our x. So our GCF for these first 2 terms is 2x. So now I'm going to factor it out, meaning I'm going to divide the 12x squared by 2x, and I'm going to divide 2x by 2x. I'm going to factor it out, and what is left is 6x plus 1. So that is the remainder once I take out the greatest common factor. Now I'm going to find the GCF of the second 2 terms. So we have negative 30x and negative 5. So the factors of negative 30x are negative 1 and 30, negative 2 and 15, negative 3 and 10, negative 5 and 6. Now I'm going to find the factors of negative 5, and negative 5 are negative 1 and 5 or negative 5 and 1. Now here my greatest common factor is going to be negative 5. Now you'll see here in a minute why I factored out the negative 5 and not just a positive 5. So when I divide both terms by negative 5, I get 6x plus 1. See here that my parentheses, 6x plus 1, match. That's because I did factor out the negative so that the parentheses would match. If I factored out a positive 5, then I would be left with negative 6x minus 1, and then my parentheses would not match. And my goal is to make these identical. So when I put the common remainder in one parentheses, so the 6x plus 1, then what I'm left with that's going to be in the second parentheses is 2x and a negative 5. So now I have completely factored this 4-term polynomial into 2 parentheses that are multiplied together. Now my step 4 is going to be to check my answer. So I can double check to make sure that I factored it correctly. So I'm going to take the 6x plus 1 and the 2x minus 5, multiply that together using my area model, and confirm that I have the same 4-term polynomial that I started off with. All right, let's do some more practice problems. So we have 2x squared plus x plus 8x plus 4. I'm going to split this 4-term polynomial in half. And first I'm going to find the greatest common factor of 2x squared plus x. So I'm going to find the factors of 2x squared, which are just 1 and 2, and the factors of x. So that's just 1 times 1 if I'm looking at my coefficients. So my greatest common factor here is going to be a 1. And then I'm going to look at my x. I have x squared and x, while x is the smallest, has the smallest exponent. So my GCF is either 1x or x is technically how it should be written. So now I'm going to divide both terms by x. And once I divide both terms by x, I get 2x plus 1. And remember, I have to factor out that x, so it didn't go away. I just have to take it out and list it out front of the parentheses. Now I'm going to find the greatest common factor for 8x plus 4. So 8x is 1 times 8. 4 is 1 times 4. I also have 8x. The factors of 8x are 2 and 4. And the factors of 4 are 2 and 2. So my greatest common factor between these 2 terms is going to be a 4. Because this term does not have an x, I cannot factor out an x. So it's just going to be 4. So I'm going to divide both terms by 4. So I factored it out, and I'm left with 2x plus 1. Now I can write that 2x plus 1 outside in front, okay, because they are the exact same. So essentially I am factoring out the 2x plus 1, and what is left is x plus 4. Now I can go ahead and check my work to make sure I did it correctly. Does 2x plus 1 multiplied by x plus 4, does that give me the same polynomial that I started off with? And it does. I get 2x squared plus x plus 8x plus 4. So since that does check, I know that this is my correct and final answer. Okay, moving on to example 2. I'm going to continue to find the GCF of my first two terms. So here it's 2x squared and negative 14x. So the factors of 2 are 1 and 2. Negative 14 are 1 and negative 14, or 2 and negative 7. So the greatest common factor is going to be a 2. And then the smallest variable, the smallest exponent with the variable is going to be 1. So my greatest common factor is 2x. I divide both terms by 2x, so I can factor it out, and I'm left with x minus 7. Now I'm going to find the greatest common factor of 4x and negative 28. So I'm going to lift all my factors over here in a factor table. So 4 is 1 times 4, or 2 times 2. Negative 28 is 1 times negative 28, 2 times negative 14, 4 times negative 7. So you'll notice here that my greatest common factor is a 4. Okay, I do not have like variables here, so my GCF is just going to be 4. I divide both terms by 4, so I factor out a positive 4, and I'm left with x minus 7. Great. My parentheses do match, so I'm going to factor that out. So I'm left with x minus 7, and the remainder goes in the other parentheses, which is 2x plus 4. Now that I have my factors, now I can go ahead and check my work by multiplying them together in my area model. And if I get the same polynomial that I started off with, like I did here, 2x squared, negative 14x, plus 4x, and negative 28. Because these do match, I now know that I do have the correct answer, correct factors. So I have x minus 7 multiplied by 2x plus 4. All right, example 3, we have 15x squared plus 5x. We're going to find our GCF of those two terms. You will notice that it does start to get easier and easier to find your greatest common factor. And if you can recognize that right away, you don't have to do the charts. However, some students struggle a little bit more than others. So the chart is is a sure way to make sure that we found all the factors and that we found the greatest common factor. So here between 15x squared and 5x, my greatest common factor is going to be a 5 for my coefficients. X squared and x, I can factor out an x, so my GCF is 5x. Now I'm going to divide those two terms by 5x, and I get 5x multiplied by 3x plus 1. That's what's left over after I divide it out. And now I have 3x plus 1. Well, if I have to find my greatest common factor for 3x plus 1, you'll notice there's nothing I can really factor out because the greatest common factor they have is 1, and they both don't have a variable. So my GCF here is just 1. So what that looks like is I would factor out a positive 1, and inside the parentheses, I would be left with 3x plus 1. Now that my parentheses do match, okay, I'm going to write that 3x plus 1 up front, and then the remainder that goes in the other parentheses is 5x plus 1. Now I can double check my work. Do these two factors, when they multiply together, do they give me the original polynomial? So once I multiply them using the area model, I get 15x squared plus 5x plus 3x plus 1. That does match my original polynomial. So I know that I have found the correct factors of this 4-term polynomial. Okay, one last example here. We have 2x to the power of 3 minus 16x squared. We're going to find the GCF, or greatest common factor, of those two terms. So 2x to the power of 3 is just 1 times 2, and negative 16x squared is 1 times negative 16, and 2 times negative 8, and 4 times negative 4. So my greatest common factor here will be a 2. And between x3 and x squared, my greatest common factor will be an x squared. So my greatest common factor is 2x squared. So I'm going to divide both terms by 2x squared. So once I factor that out, I'm left with x minus 8. Now I'm going to find the greatest common factor of 10x and negative 80. So 10 is 1 times 10. Negative 80 is negative 1 times 80. 10 could also be multiplied. Factors are 2 and 5. And here are the other factors of negative 80. Negative 2 times 40, negative 4 times 20, negative 5 times 16, and negative 8 times 10. Now again, we do have to be careful here with we're factoring a positive or a negative. And since we want the parentheses to match x minus 8, we are going to factor out a positive 10. So our greatest common factor here is positive 10. So I divide both terms by 10, and I get x minus 8 as my remainder. So now I'm going to take that x minus 8 and factor it out. And then the remainder I have now is 2x squared plus 10. And I can check my work. So I'm going to multiply x minus 8 times 2x plus 10. And do I get the same polynomial that I started off with at the beginning, which is 2x to the power of 3 minus 16x squared plus 10x minus 80? And I certainly do. That checks out. So I know that my final answer is x minus 8 multiplied by 2x squared plus 10. Those are the factors of this polynomial. All right. Now you have 6 practice problems to work on your own. I suggest that you try them on your own first, then check your work with a table partner. All right, that's it.